The quantum communication array crackled with static, a dying whisper of humanity's last hope. Admiral Rachel Thompson watched the holographic display dissolve into a nightmare of cascading red markers, each representing another lost colony, another world consumed by the relentless Vorx invasion. 17 minutes earlier, the battle had seemed winnable. The human defense fleet, a carefully assembled armada of cutting-edge warships, had positioned itself across the critical defense line of the Centauri Reach. Massive battlecruisers with gleaming hull plating stood ready, their weapon systems charged and calibrated for what military strategists had promised would be a turning point in the war. But the Vorx were nothing if not unpredictable. Their assault came from 6 simultaneous vectors, a strategy that defied every known principle of space warfare. Massive biomechanical ships, part organic, part machine, phased through traditional space-time barriers, rendering human targeting systems worse than useless. Where human ships relied on precise calculations and technological superiority, the Vorx moved like a living organism, adapting with each millisecond of conflict. Multiple breaches in sectors 7 through 12. Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez's voice cracked, his hands dancing across the holographic interface. Sweat beaded on his forehead, turning the navigation screens into a blurred landscape of destruction. Thompson gripped the command chair, her augmented neural interface flooding her consciousness with tactical data. She could feel the deaths, not just as numbers, but as a visceral pain that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained professional composure. Each red marker represented thousands of lives, entire ecosystems of human civilization being systematically erased. The U.S. Defiance, humanity's most advanced battlecruiser, erupted in a silent explosion that tore through the vacuum of space. Its fusion reactors detonated in a brilliant burst that momentarily outshone nearby stars, a funeral pyre for the thousands of crew members trapped inside. Thompson watched as the ship's emergency beacon flickered twice, a final futile cry for help, before being consumed by the expanding debris field. Evacuations, she demanded, though she already knew the answer. Lieutenant Rodriguez's silence was more devastating than any words. The Vorx approached with a terrifying methodology. Their ships didn't just destroy, they consumed. Massive energy tendrils extended from their biomechanical hulls, breaking down entire planetary defense systems into base molecular components. Colonies that had taken generations to build disappeared in moments, reduced to nothing more than raw materials for the invading force. Communications specialist Sarah Bennett spoke up, her voice a mixture of terror and professional discipline. "Admiral, we're receiving fragmented transmissions from the outer colonies. They're asking for evacuation instructions." Thompson knew the truth. There would be no evacuation. Not this time. The battle plan, months of strategic preparation, billions of credits in research, the collective hopes of human expansion, collapsed in less than 30 minutes. Where humanity had expected a fortress, the Vorx found nothing more than a paper wall, easily torn aside to reveal the vulnerable civilization beneath. As the last defensive platforms went dark, Admiral Thompson made a decision that would echo through the remnants of human history. She would not accept this as the end. Defeat was simply another problem to be solved, another challenge to be overcome. Her fingers traced a complex pattern on the command interface, initiating a protocol few knew existed. Emergency Beacon Alpha 9, a last resort communication sequence, began transmitting. Not a call for help, but a signal of defiance. The message was simple, encrypted in a way that would take the Vorx years to decode. "We are not finished." Outside the viewport, space burned with the remnants of human resistance, a graveyard of dreams and technology. But within the command ship, a spark of something more fundamental continued to burn, an unbreakable spirit that would soon reshape the very fabric of galactic conflict. The Oort cloud had never been intended as a sanctuary. These frozen remnants at the solar system's edge were supposed to be nothing more than a scientific outpost, a collection of research stations and mining platforms scattered across countless kilometers of ice and rock. Now they represented humanity's last hope. Admiral Rachel Thompson stood in the central command hub, a massive chamber carved directly into the heart of a hollowed-out asteroid. The walls pulsed with a soft blue light from countless data streams, a stark contrast to the pitch-black vacuum outside. Survivors from 100 fallen colonies huddled in makeshift quarters, their faces a canvas of survival and quiet desperation. "We've lost 73% of our total population," Commander David Walker reported, his voice stripped of emotion. A holographic display materialized between them, showing the devastating statistical breakdown. Blue markers representing human-controlled territories have been reduced to a few scattered points, like dying embers in an endless night. Thompson's augmented neural interface processed the data, feeling each number as a personal wound. Entire planetary systems, worlds that had taken generations to colonize and develop, were now nothing more than historical footnotes. Children who would never know their homeworlds. Cultures erased in moments of Vorac's destruction. "We're not dead," she responded quietly, her words cutting through the silent despair. "We're regrouping." The surviving fleet was a shadow of its former self. 17 battlecruisers, 43 support vessels, roughly 12,000 personnel spread across a network of hidden bases. Where once humanity had dreamed of galactic expansion, they now fought for simple survival. In a nearby research chamber, Dr. Michael Roberts worked with a team of the most brilliant minds humanity could muster. Quantum physicists worked alongside xenobiologists. Computer engineers collaborated with psychological warfare specialists. The traditional boundaries of scientific disciplines had dissolved. Survival demanded innovation. "We've been analyzing the Vorac's communication patterns," Roberts explained to a group of weary military strategists. His holographic display showed complex neural networks, alien communication pathways that looked more like living organisms than technological systems. "Their entire command structure is fundamentally different from our hierarchical models. They don't just communicate, they exist as a collective consciousness." A young lieutenant named Jessica Chen interrupted, her voice carrying a hint of desperate hope. "So how do we fight something like that?" Roberts smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen in weeks, by being completely, unpredictably human. The resistance took shape in unexpected ways. Refugee engineers converted mining equipment into defensive systems. Quantum computers worked overtime, analyzing microscopic fragments of Vorac's tactical data. Every surviving specialist became a weapon, not just soldiers, but living strategies of resistance. Supply lines were maintained through a complex network of hidden jump points and quantum-encrypted communication channels. Small teams of specialized operatives moved between the scattered human outposts, carrying not just supplies, but hope. Each successful mission was a middle finger to the Vorac's invasion, a statement that humanity would not go quietly. In the medical bay, doctors worked miracles with limited resources. Experimental nano-regenerative technologies, previously considered too risky for widespread use, now represented the difference between survival and extinction. Wounded personnel were rebuilt, enhanced, transformed into something more than they had been before the invasion. Admiral Thompson watched a group of children playing in a secured recreation area. Some were orphans, others refugees. They played a game that seemed part strategy, part survival simulation, building complex structures from recycled materials, creating defensive positions, working as a team. The next generation was already learning the most important lesson. Adaptation is survival. "We're not rebuilding," Thompson muttered to herself, watching the children. "We're evolving." Outside the asteroid base, the Oort cloud stretched into infinite darkness. Countless chunks of ice and rock, once considered irrelevant, now represented humanity's greatest defense. The Vorac's would never expect humanity to retreat here, to transform these frozen wastelands into a crucible of resistance. The whispers of humanity's resistance began to grow, soft at first, then with increasing volume. Not a cry of defeat, but a promise of something more fundamental, an unbreakable spirit that refused to be extinguished. The research chamber hummed with an electric intensity that bordered on madness. Dr. Jason Miller stood before a holographic display that looked more like a living, breathing organism than any scientific diagram. Fractals of data twisted and reformed, representing something far beyond traditional computational models. "We've been looking at this all wrong," Miller announced to the assembled group of surviving specialists. Exhaustion lined his face, but his eyes burned with an almost maniacal clarity. Around him, the walls of the asteroid research base were lined with thousands of data streams, quantum processors working at near-impossible speeds. Commander David Walker leaned forward, skepticism etched into every line of his weathered face. "Explain." Miller's presentation began with a fundamental deconstruction of everything humanity understood about conflict. The holographic display showed the Orcs communication networks, not as mechanical systems, but as living, breathing neural pathways. Where human military strategy relied on hierarchical command structures and linear thinking, the Orcs operated like a single, massive organism. "They don't think," Miller continued, his fingers dancing across the interface. "They don't strategize. They react. It's a collective consciousness that moves with perfect synchronization, but that's also their greatest weakness." A murmur ran through the assembled team. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a xenopsychological expert, stepped forward. Her augmented neural interface flickered with complex data patterns. "Collective consciousness means collective vulnerability," she added, completing Miller's thought. The breakthrough was elegantly simple and monumentally complex. Humanity's greatest strength had always been individual creativity, the ability to think outside established parameters. Where the Orcs saw patterns, humans saw possibilities. Where alien logic demanded conformity, human innovation thrived on unpredictability. Miller pulled up a series of simulations. Each showed a different approach to conflict. Traditional military strategies, psychological warfare techniques, even mathematical models of social disruption. The common thread was beautiful in its simplicity: introduce chaos. "We can't fight them with traditional weapons," Miller explained. "We need to attack their fundamental way of existing. Their collective consciousness is a strength, but it's also a massive vulnerability. One moment of true unpredictability could collapse their entire strategic framework." The team worked in shifts that blurred the lines between day and night. Quantum computers processed millions of potential scenarios every second. Psychological warfare specialists developed communication strategies designed to introduce cognitive dissonance into the Orcs neural networks. Dr. Rodriguez demonstrated an early prototype, a communication virus that didn't just disrupt signals, but introduced complex philosophical paradoxes. "Imagine sending a message that fundamentally challenges their entire understanding of existence," she explained. The first test caused an entire section of their simulated Orcs network to simply pause. A pause might seem insignificant, but in a collective consciousness that operated with instantaneous precision, a moment of hesitation was catastrophic. Jason Miller's team began developing what they called cognitive weapons. These weren't traditional armaments, but intricate psychological tools designed to exploit the fundamental differences between human and Orcs thought processes, mathematical algorithms that solved problems through creative randomness, communication signals that introduced genuine uncertainty. "They expect linear responses," Miller said during one late-night strategy session. "We'll give them quantum uncertainty." The human survivors watched the development with a mixture of hope and desperation. These weren't just theoretical models. This was their last chance at survival. Each breakthrough represented a potential path to resistance, a way to transform near-total defeat into something resembling hope. Commander Walker approached Miller after one particularly intense simulation. "Can this actually work?" he asked, the weight of humanity's survival hanging in the question. Miller's response was quiet but absolute. "It has to." Outside the research chamber, the frozen darkness of the Oort cloud stretched into infinity. Humanity's last hope was being forged in this crucible of innovation, a weapon more powerful than any traditional armament. Not a tool of destruction, but a strategy of fundamental reimagination. The Vorx had never encountered an enemy like this before, and that, Miller knew, was their greatest advantage. Major Elena Rodriguez adjusted her neural interface, feeling the microscopic connections integrate with her central nervous system. The operation room was a sterile environment of muted grays and soft blue lights, filled with specialists who looked more like advanced medical technicians than traditional military operatives. "Infiltration team is ready," whispered Lieutenant Michael Chen, his fingers dancing across a holographic control panel. The team consisted of 12 highly specialized operatives, each one a living weapon of psychological warfare, transformed by experimental neural augmentations and months of intensive training. Their target was nothing less than the entire communication infrastructure of the Vorx invasion force. The mission was impossible by any traditional military standard. 12 humans would attempt to introduce systemic chaos into an alien communication network that spanned multiple star systems. Where conventional warfare demanded physical confrontation, this team would wage war through information, uncertainty, and calculated disruption. Rodriguez's augmentations allowed her to perceive communication networks as living, breathing organisms. Quantum encrypted signals became visible pathways of light and shadow, complex neural networks that pulsed with alien intelligence. The Vorx communication system was a marvel of collective consciousness, and their greatest vulnerability. "First wave of cognitive disruptors," Chen announced. The attack began not with weapons, but with information. Carefully crafted communication packages designed to introduce microscopic inconsistencies into the Vorx neural network. Mathematical paradoxes wrapped in communication protocols. Philosophical contradictions disguised as routine data transfers. In one section of their network, a minor statistical anomaly appeared, then another, then dozens, each one too small to trigger immediate defensive responses, but collectively building toward a massive systemic breakdown. Lieutenant Sarah Bennett, a specialist in xenolinguistics, had spent months developing communication vectors that would be simultaneously incomprehensible and deeply provocative to the Vorx collective consciousness. Her team had essentially created a language virus, a set of communication protocols that would challenge the fundamental way the Vorx processed information. "We're not just disrupting their communications," Bennett explained during mission preparation. "We're introducing genuine cognitive uncertainty into their entire operational framework." The first signs of success came unexpectedly. A Vorx communication hub near the Epsilon Eridani system suddenly paused its processing. For 3 microseconds, the entire network hesitated. A moment of uncertainty that would be imperceptible to human observers, but catastrophic for a system built on instantaneous, collective decision-making. Rodriguez watched the holographic displays, seeing the intricate dance of information warfare. Each disruption was a calculated strike, designed to erode the Vorx's sense of absolute certainty. Where their collective consciousness demanded perfect synchronization, the human team introduced beautiful, terrifying randomness. Quantum encrypted viruses transformed Vorx battle networks into labyrinths of misinformation. Communication channels became weapons, spreading confusion, manufacturing false retreats, and creating tactical hallucinations that made the Imperium's military leadership question their own perceptions of reality. "Target acquisition complete," Chen reported, his voice calm despite the magnitude of their operation. The human team wasn't just gathering intelligence. They were fundamentally reshaping the battlefield through pure information. Each communication package was a precision instrument, designed to introduce microscopic doubts into a system that had never experienced genuine uncertainty. In one particularly brilliant moment, Bennett's team introduced a communication protocol that was simultaneously a mathematical proof, a philosophical argument, and a logical paradox. The Vorx communication network spent precious milliseconds attempting to process a concept that was intentionally unresolvable. Those milliseconds were weapons more powerful than any traditional armament. Rodriguez allowed herself a small smile. The Vorx had encountered many enemies before, but they had never faced an opponent willing to wage war at the level of pure information, pure possibility. Humanity's last hope was no longer about survival. It was about reimagining the very concept of conflict. Dr. William Anderson stood before a containment chamber that defied every known principle of technological development. Inside, what appeared to be a shimmering, almost liquid substance moved with an intelligence that seemed to breathe, think, and adapt in real time. "This isn't technology," he said quietly to Admiral Rachel Thompson and the assembled team of researchers. "This is a living, thinking organism that happens to defend humanity." The breakthrough had come from an unexpected convergence of disciplines. Quantum computing, nanoengineering, xenobiology, and neural network theory had collided in a moment of pure human innovation. What emerged was nothing short of a technological miracle, a defensive system that was more alive than machine. Each nanite was a thinking entity, connected through a quantum neural network that could process more possibilities in a microsecond than the Vorx could in a decade. They didn't just respond to threats. They anticipated, learned, and evolved with a speed that bordered on the miraculous. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a key member of the research team, explained the fundamental breakthrough. "Traditional technology is static," she said, her augmented neural interface flickering with complex data streams. "Our system is organic. It doesn't just adapt, it grows." The demonstration began with a simple test. A simulated Vorx attack pattern was introduced into the containment chamber. Where traditional defensive systems would have preset response protocols, this new technology did something extraordinary. The nanite collective didn't just defend. It studied. It learned. The first layer of nanites absorbed the attack pattern, breaking it down at a molecular level. Within milliseconds, they had not only understood the attack, but had developed multiple counter-strategies. More impressively, they began to predict future variations of the same attack, creating defensive measures before the threat had fully materialized. "Watch this," Anderson said, bringing up a holographic display. The nanite collective began to restructure itself. Defensive capabilities morphed and shifted, creating complex geometric patterns that seemed to defy the laws of physical engineering. What started as a simple protective layer transformed into an intricate, living shield that could change its molecular composition in real time. Lieutenant Michael Chen, a systems integration specialist, looked on in wonder. "It's not just responding," he muttered. "It's thinking." The implications were staggering. Traditional warfare relied on predictable systems, established protocols, and linear thinking. This new technology introduced something fundamentally different, a defensive system with genuine creativity. Dr. Rodriguez demonstrated how the nanite collective could interface with human neural systems. Augmented soldiers could now communicate directly with their defensive technology, creating a symbiotic relationship that blurred the lines between organic and synthetic. "We're not enhancing humans," she explained. "We're creating a new form of existence." Test after test pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible. The nanite collective could repair itself, redistribute resources, and learn from every interaction. When exposed to damaged equipment, it didn't just repair, it improved. A scratched weapon system would emerge stronger, more efficient, with modifications that no human engineer could have conceived. Admiral Thompson watched the demonstrations with a mixture of hope and scientific skepticism. "Can we control it?" she asked, the weight of humanity's survival in her voice. Anderson smiled. "Control is the wrong word. We're collaborating with it." The final test pushed the technology to its limits. A full-scale simulation of a Vorx attack was introduced, a scenario so complex that traditional defensive systems would have been overwhelmed in seconds. The nanite collective did something unexpected. It didn't just defend, it played. The defensive system transformed the attack into a learning opportunity, breaking down the assault into component parts, understanding its fundamental nature, and developing not just counter-strategies, but entirely new conceptual approaches to conflict. Outside the research chamber, the frozen darkness of the Orc cloud seemed to pale in comparison to the living technology being developed. Humanity had always been defined by its ability to innovate, to transform limitations into opportunities. Now, they were becoming something more than human, something that could truly fight back. Space erupted in a symphony of impossible movement. Admiral Rachel Thompson watched from the command bridge as the human fleet defied every known principle of warfare. The ships moved like living entities, their nano-adaptive hulls shifting and reconfiguring with each millisecond of engagement. Where traditional military doctrine demanded rigid formation and predictable attack patterns, these vessels danced. Targeting systems are offline, Lieutenant Michael Chen reported, his voice a mixture of excitement and disbelief. But we're operating at 287% projected efficiency. The first wave of the counteroffensive began not with a traditional assault, but with a choreography of controlled chaos. Human ships didn't just move, they anticipated. Each vessel was now a living, thinking organism, connected through the quantum neural network developed by Dr. William Anderson's team. The Vorx battle group approached, their massive biomechanical ships expecting the same predictable resistance that had crushed human defenses months earlier. They found something entirely different. The human fleet split into impossible configurations. Ships that should have been vulnerable transformed mid-attack, their molecular structures reshaping to present impossible targeting solutions. Where a Vorx weapon tried to lock onto one vessel, it would find the ship had already become something else entirely. Dr. Elena Rodriguez monitored the tactical displays, her augmented neural interface translating the complex dance of combat into comprehensible data streams. "We're not fighting," she muttered to herself. "We're solving a real-time, multi-dimensional problem." Each human ship carried the nano-adaptive technology developed in the hidden Orc cloud bases. They were no longer mere machines but living strategies of resistance. Weapon systems learned and evolved with each microsecond of conflict. Defensive capabilities predicted attacks before they materialized. A massive Vorx dreadnought launched what would have been a devastating energy cascade, a weapon that had reduced entire planetary defense systems to atomic dust. The human response was nothing short of miraculous. The targeted ship didn't just dodge. It analyzed the incoming energy signature, understood its fundamental composition, and then, most incredibly, began to absorb and redirect the attack. The energy cascade that should have obliterated an entire ship instead became a weapon used against the Vorx fleet. Adaptive resonance frequency engaged, Chen announced, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that looked more like living art than traditional control systems. Admiral Thompson watched as the battle transformed from a military engagement into something closer to a complex mathematical equation being solved in real time. The human fleet didn't just fight, they communicated. Each ship was a node in a massive living network that processed information faster than the Vorx collective consciousness could comprehend. Psychological warfare merged with technological innovation. The ships themselves became a message, a declaration that humanity had fundamentally changed the nature of conflict. A Vorx communication hub attempted to coordinate a counterattack. Before its signals could fully propagate, the human fleet had already anticipated and neutralized the potential strategies. It was like watching a chess master play against an opponent who didn't yet understand the rules of the game. Targeting matrix complete, Rodriguez reported. Full spectrum adaptive response activated. The offensive wasn't about destruction. It was about demonstration. Humanity was showing the Vorx, and themselves, what was possible when innovation knew no boundaries. Ships that had been on the brink of destruction moments earlier now moved with a fluid grace that defied traditional understanding of space combat. Hulls transformed, weapon systems evolved, defensive capabilities became living, thinking entities. "We're rewriting the fundamental rules of engagement," Admiral Thompson said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. Outside the viewport, space became a canvas of impossible movement. Human vessels twisted and transformed, absorbing, redirecting, and ultimately defeating a force that had seemed unstoppable mere months earlier. The Vorx had never encountered an enemy like this before. An enemy that didn't just fight, but fundamentally reimagined the very concept of conflict. Humanity's last hope had become something far more powerful, a living, evolving strategy of survival. The assault on the Vorx Central Command System began with something more dangerous than any weapon, an idea. Major Elena Rodriguez stood in the neural interface chamber, her consciousness stretched across quantum communication networks that defied traditional understanding of space and time. Around her, a team of 12 specialized operatives prepared for the most complex infiltration in human history. Their target was the very heart of the Vorx civilization, a massive neural network that served as both communication hub and fundamental governing structure. Unlike human hierarchical systems, the Vorx existed as a collective consciousness, each individual node simultaneously part of a greater whole and a discrete intelligence. Cognitive disruptors are primed, whispered Lieutenant Michael Chen, his augmented neural interface crackling with potential. The first wave of attack was invisible. Carefully crafted information packages began to infiltrate the Vorx network, not as traditional viruses, but as complex philosophical and mathematical paradoxes. Each transmission was a precisely designed cognitive weapon, engineered to introduce fundamental uncertainties into a system that had never experienced genuine doubt. Dr. William Anderson's living technology provided the perfect delivery mechanism. Nano-adaptive information packets that could reshape themselves, learn, and evolve in real time. They didn't just carry information, they were living strategies of cognitive warfare. The Vorx network first responded with its traditional collective response, a unified instantaneous attempt to isolate and neutralize the incoming information. But these were no ordinary infiltration attempts. Each packet was a puzzle, a challenge to the fundamental way the Vorx processed existence. One transmission introduced a mathematical proof that simultaneously existed and did not exist. Another carried a linguistic construct that challenged the very basis of their collective communication. A third was a philosophical argument that created recursive loops of logic impossible for a collective consciousness to resolve. For the first time in their known history, the Vorx experienced something entirely new, genuine uncertainty. Small fissures began to appear in their communication networks. Moments of hesitation, microscopic disagreements that would have been impossible in their previous state of absolute synchronization. Each uncertainty became a weapon, spreading like a beautiful, terrible virus of individual thought. Admiral Rachel Thompson monitored the assault from the command ship, watching holographic displays that looked more like living art than traditional tactical interfaces. "We're not destroying them," she said quietly to her team. "We're giving them something they've never had before. The ability to think independently." The attack wasn't about physical destruction. It was about introducing the concept of individual consciousness to a collective that had never experienced it. Vorx communication hubs began to fragment. Small sections of their network started to develop what could only be described as individual perspectives. Tiny pockets of disagreement emerged, first microscopic, then growing. The absolute synchronization that had been their greatest strength became their most profound vulnerability. Major Rodriguez pushed deeper into the network, her consciousness dancing through impossible informational landscapes. She wasn't just attacking. She was exploring, understanding, revealing the fundamental nature of the Vorx collective consciousness. "We're introducing chaos," Dr. Elena Rodriguez explained to the command team. "But it's a very specific kind of chaos, the chaos of individual thought." Entire sectors of the Vorx communication network began to break down, not through destruction, but through the introduction of something far more dangerous, the possibility of individual perspective. Nodes that had always acted in perfect unison began to question, to hesitate, to consider alternatives. The human team watched in wonder as the most powerful collective consciousness in the known galaxy began to fragment. Not through overwhelming force, but through the simple, powerful introduction of uncertainty. "Target is destabilizing," Lieutenant Chen reported, his voice a mixture of scientific excitement and profound reverence. Humanity had found its ultimate weapon, not a tool of destruction, but a method of liberation. They weren't conquering the Vorix. They were offering them something they had never experienced before, the possibility of individual existence. Outside the ship's viewport, space seemed to hold its breath. The fundamental structure of an entire civilization was being rewritten, not through violence, but through the most powerful force in the universe, an idea. The negotiations happened in a space between spaces, a quantum communication chamber that defied traditional understanding of physical reality. Admiral Rachel Thompson stood at the center, surrounded by representatives from what remained of the Vorix leadership. But they were no longer the unified collective they had been months earlier. Individual voices emerged, each speaking with a newfound sense of independent consciousness that would have been impossible before human intervention. "We do not understand," one Vorix representative said. And critically, it spoke as an individual, not as a collected voice. "How did you transform us?" Dr. Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, her augmented neural interface humming with subtle energy. "We didn't transform you," she explained carefully. "We simply introduced the possibility of individual thought." The chamber itself was a marvel of collaborative engineering. Quantum interfaces allowed direct communication beyond traditional linguistic barriers. Nano-adaptive translation systems ensured that every nuance, every subtle meaning could be precisely understood. What had begun as a war of survival had become something far more profound. Humanity had not conquered the Vorix. They had liberated them. The fractured Vorix leadership struggled to comprehend their new reality. Centuries of collective consciousness had been replaced by something entirely new, individual perspective. Some mourned the loss of their previous unified state. Others explored their newfound individuality with a sense of wonder that bordered on euphoria. Admiral Thompson understood the delicate nature of this moment. Humanity wasn't seeking dominance. They were offering a fundamental reimagining of existence. "We're proposing a new model of galactic cooperation," she explained, holographic displays showing intricate networks of potential collaboration. Not conquest, not submission. Mutual understanding. The nano-adaptive technologies developed during humanity's desperate resistance became the foundation of a new diplomatic framework. Communication systems that could translate not just language, but intention. Collaborative platforms that allowed for genuine cross-species understanding. Dr. William Anderson presented the technical framework. Each communication channel was now a living, learning entity. Not a static transmission, but a dynamic conversation that could adapt, grow, and evolve in real time. The Vorix representatives, now individuals with distinct perspectives, began to see the potential. Their previous collective consciousness had been a limitation, not a strength. Humanity had shown them a universe of possibilities they had never imagined. "We were trapped," one Vorix representative said, its voice carrying a tone of wonder that would have been impossible months earlier. "We did not know we were trapped." The negotiations weren't about territory or resources. They were about reimagining the fundamental nature of intelligent existence. Humanity had not just survived. They had transformed the very concept of galactic civilization. Quantum diplomatic interfaces allowed for unprecedented levels of transparency. No hidden agendas, no manipulative strategies. Just pure, unfiltered communication. The nano-adaptive technologies developed in humanity's darkest moment became the bridge between species. "We offer collaboration," Admiral Thompson said, "not conquest." The transformed Vorix leadership saw the true nature of humanity's approach. This wasn't about winning a war. It was about expanding the very concept of potential, about showing that individual perspective could be a strength, not a weakness. Small delegations from other galactic civilizations watched the negotiations. They saw something unprecedented, a species that had transformed a near-total defeat into a fundamental reimagining of existence. Dr. Rodriguez summarized the breakthrough in a way that would be recorded in galactic historical archives. Survival is not about overwhelming force. It's about the capacity to adapt, to understand, to see possibilities where others see only limitations. As the negotiations continued, something magical happened. The rigid boundaries between species began to dissolve, not through force, but through genuine understanding. Outside the negotiation chamber, the vast darkness of space seemed to hold its breath. Humanity had done more than survive. They had changed everything. The final act of the war was not destruction. It was creation.